Hi, welcome to podcast Daughters of Wisdom. I'm Holly Smith. This is Mallory and Edy. Today we're going to discuss building a consistent prayer life. So let's go ahead and get started. I just want to start out with just a little bit of something to think about. But if you have a plant, have you ever had a plant and killed it? Because I have.
Yes.
When you first get it, you're committed, you're ready to take care of that plant. And then, life happens and you get busy and you forget to water it one day, and then you forget 2 days, and then you forget 10 days. So what happens to the plant? It dies, right? And so, and sometimes our prayer life can be that way. Sometimes we put it on hold, or we just forget about it in the busyness of life, and that's not what we want as our prayer life. And so we just need to remember that analogy, maybe just to remember that if we don't take care of our prayer lives, our spiritual lives are going to look like that plant. And so prayer is such a important part of our Christian walk. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, just trying to improve our prayer life to make it more consistent on a daily basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with some verses about prayer and just some reminders of what our prayer life needs to look like. And then we're going to look at a few people in the Bible and their prayer lives and what we can glean from them. And then we're going to ask them just some practical questions about, what we can do to help all of our prayer lives be better. So let's go ahead and get started with 1 Thessalonians 5:17. It's a really short verse and everybody knows it. Pray without ceasing, right? So does pray without ceasing mean don't stop ever in your prayer? You can't live life as you're constantly praying all the time, but that just means to have a life that's consistent. That's always, prayer is part of your everyday life, right? James 5:16 is another one that we hear all the time, but I think just looking at it closely, it just says the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. That's what the ESV says. And it talks about there about Elijah, and it talks about him he was a man like us. He was like us, and it's something that we need to remember. And it reminds us that he had to pray that it would rain and not rain, but we and the power in that prayer was very sufficient. It was exactly what he needed. He was very specific in that prayer, and we need to remember that's how our prayer life can be. What's some other verse, Mallory?
I think of 1 John 5:14. It says, "And this is the confidence that we have toward him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." And that is, it gives us peace, I know for me, and confidence, just knowing that our Father, the creator of the universe, my creator, he hears us. And I think it's important that if we're asking according to his will, that he hears us, and we can have confidence that he hears those prayers.
Sorry?
I think that's good. I think of Hebrews 4:15 and 16, where it's talking about Christ being our high priest, who has been touched with all of the feelings of our infirmities, and that he was tempted in all points as like we are. And then in the next verse, it talks about coming boldly before the throne, the idea of confidence. And, that's a word we've already touched on a couple different times, and how confident we can be in our prayers. I actually had a note here in my Bible that talks about when you come boldly, come confident, but not brash, but don't be afraid to share anything that you want to share. Our Creator already knows us and knows what we're going to pray, and he wants us to come consistently, like you're talking about. Come often, come frequently, come consistently, and be bold and confident in what we're praying for.
And in that verse too, it ends with that he gives us that help. And how many prayers do people not pray and not receive the help that God can give us? It's amazing. Really, it makes you very humble to realize that if I'm not praying for these things, God can't give them to me because I haven't asked.
Well, and that's the point James makes. And James, when he talks about you have not because you did not ask.
Right.
All it took was us asking.
Right.
Or if we did ask and we asked amiss, we still would not get that. So asking in confidence, and Ephesians 3 talks about how much he can do for us, exceedingly abundantly, above all that we could think or ask.
Right.
And so that is a good point there about why we're doing it, because that help that comes.
Right. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." And verse 17, later in that chapter, tells us that we will receive the peace of God because we have asked and because we have gone to Him in our anxiousness. And also, I think it's very important too. There, it tells us to be thankful for what we have and what we in our prayer life. I think we need to be very thankful for all the things that God has blessed us with. And I think it's good to remember in Romans 1 what happens when you are not thankful. And so, anyway, all right.
Colossians 4:2 also says, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. And there's the thanksgiving again. It's the right heart and attitude when we go before God, but continuing steadfastly in prayer. I think sometimes people wait maybe until you get in a situation to pray, and it's like, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be a steadfast prayer all the time, in the highs and the lows and the in-betweens, that we need to be steadfast in those prayers, keeping that communication with God. He wants to hear from us.
Kind of reminds me of something I heard somebody say one time, that once you've prayed it, you shouldn't pray it again because you already asked. And I thought, well, that just doesn't seem to fit with all these verses we've already mentioned, because it is a consistent thing. If it weighs on us that much, then our Heavenly Father wants to hear from us that much. And that's why, when it talks about casting all your cares on Him and praying instead of being anxious, well, why? Because prayer consistently will help take care of those things.
Right.
I think that's a good point, Mallory,
Yeah.
on that. Another verse that I thought of that's always meant something to me was Psalm 116, 1 and 2. I can remember, sometimes you think, okay, I've prayed. Is it doing anything? Why do I keep praying? And I think this answers it, because the psalmist said, I love the Lord because He has heard my voice and my supplications, because He has inclined His ear unto me. Therefore will I call upon Him as long as I live. The psalmist could see that God was hearing his prayers, and it was because of that he said, I will continue to pray. And I think we could all sit here and think of many times where we have prayed diligently over something, whether it was an issue at work or a family issue or church, something, whatever it was, a struggle we were facing. We prayed day in, day out over that, and we saw the answer. Maybe it wasn't immediate, but looking back, we can see it. And that's why the psalmist says he continues to pray. That's why we need to be consistent in prayer, because of what we've already received, and then knowing what we can continue to receive from that.
We were discussing on the way up here today some things about the things in our lives that we have seen that prayer has, we have seen the answer to that prayer later. And it's really, and you were talking about your kids, and it's really great to see how they can, they have their own prayer lives and how they prayed for something and how they can see that. And it's great to see that. And it is a good reminder that prayer really does work, right?
And teaching this to your kids, I was telling them, like, when my daughter at college called and said, I prayed about this, and then this happened, and it's just, it's neat and exciting to see to teach that to your, don't forget to, we have our own prayer life, but also to teaching our children that.
Right. Well, let's just look at a few different people in the Bible. We're going to just do a few here. That things that we can learn from these people. So Daniel, I think, is a really good example. Daniel 6:10 says that he prayed 3 times a day, and that was his habit, right? And so we know about Daniel. We know that he purposed in his heart to do certain things in his life. And I think this is probably one of those things that he had a daily habit of. He went every day, 3 times a day without fail, and the people around him knew that. I think that's really important for us to remember about our prayer lives. Do people know that we are praying people? Nehemiah is one of my favorites. In 13 chapters, there are 13 prayers of Nehemiah, and so it's really interesting to see how he prayed. He almost every single time there's an issue, he prays to God. Like, that's his immediate response. In chapter 2, I think it's verse 4, it says that before he spoke to the king, like in that breath of a second, he thought to pray. And I don't know what he said, but it was quick and it was simple, but it was a prayer, and that's what he thought at first. And that's how I think I think that's a really good example for us to live our lives. To prayer is always the first thing.
And I think that's the praying without ceasing.
Right.
It's those little
Right.
prayers all throughout the day in every circumstance, really,
Right.
too.
Right. Jeremiah is another one. There's 16 prayers in that book. He is or maybe one of the most persecuted person, I think, or prophet in the Bible. And he prays all the way through that book in all different types of circumstances. I think he's a great example. David, of course, was a praying man. I didn't realize this until I was studying for this, but 73 Psalms are all of David's, and that we know for sure are his. And there's many times otherwise in his life that we see that he stopped and prayed. Anna, I think, is a really good example. She is talked about in Luke chapter 2, verse 37. It says that she worshiped with fasting and prayer night and day. And we don't know a whole lot about her, but this is what we know. And I think that's interesting that is what was said about her.
I think that speaks volumes about her.
Right.
It doesn't have to take much for something like that to tell us she was godly. She had open communication with her Heavenly Father. She was doing what she should. It just, how amazing that just a simple she prayed tells us so much about her character and who she was.
Right.
We have one of our daughters named Anna, and I love this verse about Anna.
I know, it's really interesting. A lot of times in the Bible accounts that we see the little tidbits of information that we're given about people. And I think it's just interesting what is left for their memory, but that was Anna.
What they're known for.
Right. And Hannah, of course, in 1 Samuel, we see that she had fervency when she prayed. And we see the benefits that came from that prayer there in 1 Samuel of hers. The persistent widow is another one that we talk about a lot. The context here is that Christ is talking to his disciples about being constant in prayer and through the persecution that they were going through. But I think it's interesting here, too, just to note that this woman persisted all the time to this judge of the things that she needed, and that judge got sick of her. And so that's why he gave her what he needed. But I think it's good to note that God, if we were the persistent prayer, then God is the one who's going to give us those things, but also if it's in his will, of course. But he doesn't get sick of us, like you were saying earlier. He doesn't. Thankfully, right? He doesn't get sick of us, asking for the same thing, or maybe asking for that same situation in different ways. That we talk to him about different things, and I think that's a blessing. That's a huge blessing. And I think that goes back into the confidence that we have in prayer and the security that we have with prayer.
I've wondered before if he's more disappointed in those that don't come back. We say, oh man, I've prayed the same prayer every day this week.
Again, I'm praying.
Yeah, I feel really bad. It's kind of like I feel bad. I'm asking for the same things. But I wonder if it's actually the opposite, that he's more saddened by those who don't want to continually. As a parent, I try to put myself in that perspective.
Right.
Am I more disappointed when my kids aren't coming to me about something and when children don't talk to me, or am I more disappointed because they do keep coming back?
Right.
It's when they're not coming back that really I get concerned, or I wonder what's going on, or what's going on that maybe I need to fix something. And so I think about that, the communication there.
And sometimes, too, you wonder, too, like when people don't come back, like what's the reason? Are they just giving up,
Right.
And we shouldn't give up on our prayer life, and I wonder if that's what happens to a lot of people if they just give up because they don't see an immediate response.
Right.
And that could be a lack of faith on our part, if that's, if we're, we need to be patient in that for sure.
And of course, I'm going to go down to Christ here, but of course, he is our ultimate example. If Google can be trusted, there are 10 prayers of Christ that we have the words for that have been written out, but there are 25 other times that he prays, that it's listed that he prays. And so, Christ is our ultimate example. He got up early in the morning so he could go pray by himself. He took those times that he could go up into the mountains and pray, or all the different examples of Christ. And I think it's very humbling for us to realize if Christ prayed that much, we need way more, right? And
Yes.
so I think Christ, of course, is our ultimate example. So let's go ahead and let's just talk about some things about how we, the three of us, maybe make an effort to keep our prayer life consistent. So let's just answer a few questions. So what do you do to keep your prayer life consistent in your day-to-day life, Mallory?
The same time, I like to start my day with a prayer. I like to get up, with kids in the home. I like to get up earlier and have quiet time. But I would say the same time for my prayer. I mean, I do pray throughout the day, but
Right.
I would say early in the morning, same time helps me.
I'm very similar. And it's for me, it's not necessarily the time, but the activity. I actually like to pray when I walk in the mornings.
I do
because
too.
being outside, I don't have distractions. Usually it's pretty quiet, except for the few people who are getting up and driving to work, and,
Right.
but nobody's interrupting me. Nobody's calling
No,
me.
that's
that
when I like
early
to
in the
pray
morning.
on my morning walk
Yes.
because I don't get as distracted.
Yeah,
If I
and
leave the house,
something about walking and movement. At first I thought, well, this is going to take long. And then I found myself, when I first started the habit, my prayers kept getting longer. And then I would think of more things that needed my attention in my prayers, or more people would come to mind. And it just, I don't know, something about being outside in God's creation and just moving. I just find that is what works for me. And that doesn't work for everybody. I know a number of people who pray on their commute to work, and that's when they choose to pray because again, you're by yourself. You're not being interrupted usually, and
Yeah, I think for me, I put to have the same time every day just to make sure that you're thinking about it, and it doesn't get rushed or taken over by other things during the day. I start my day typically every morning while everybody else is asleep. I'm an early riser, and so that's when I typically do, a longer, thoughtful prayer for myself. So, all right. So,
if I can, I think that fits with what you were talking about with Christ, because the times that he prayed those really deep prayers, and we do have the times where the disciple said, "Teach us to pray,"
Right,
and he
right.
taught them a prayer. But like his prayer in the garden, other times that he would go off on his own, those were his prayerful times. And I think that's something we need to consider is not being distracted,
Right.
finding the quiet time. And that may change depending on what stage of life people are at. For some people, that does work better at night.
Right.
But to me, it fits so beautifully with your example of Christ and when he would go pray.
You need to I think that time period just needs to be somewhere where you can focus and have quiet, And so, and as women, as mothers, and, it's life gets busy. So just try to pick out those times that are very quiet for you. So are there any tools that you might suggest that help your prayer life?
I like a journal. I like to write. I like to go back and look at the journal, but I like to date, and I'll have just a list that's ongoing in the journal, and then I'll update it. But I do like a journal, and I do like to pray on my walk. So a lot of times I'll look at my journal and kind of look at it before my walk. But
I'm horrible about remembering. I've journaled before, and that has worked well. Usually it's just that I've texted myself. I have a long list in my text thread of things because usually it's quicker to pick that up and not lose a piece of paper, especially if somebody says, "Hey, would you pray for me?"
Yes.
Because I'm already on my phone.
Right.
I know there are a lot of apps. Do you use any of the apps?
I do. So during my morning prayer time, I usually will jot down a couple things just to keep those things in mind. But I have an app that I put other people's prayer requests in, or like maybe specific things that are specific to our family, maybe I'm praying for my son for this, or my daughter for this, or my husband for this, or whatever. But it's prayer reminder is what I use. Echo is another one that is very popular. And I've used Echo in the past as well, but prayer reminder, how it works is you just have a list and you set a thing on your phone, and it reminds you however many times a day you set. And so it just kind of comes up. So throughout the day, I can pray for those single things so that my prayer life in the morning, my longer prayer in the morning doesn't take an hour and a half,
Does it
And so
give you
because
reminders? Does it send like
it
a
does.
ding at a certain time?
Yes,
So I've used my
yes.
alarms for that.
Yes,
I
set
need
an
to try the
alarm.
app then.
No,
I need to just
do
try
use
the
an
app.
alarm, like on my alarms on the phone where the reminder app. I will set reminders for that. Like if someone's having surgery at 8 o'clock on Friday, I will do that.
Okay.
So that like 8 o'clock on Friday,
It goes off.
Yeah, I get a
Okay.
reminder.
And that's just in remind.
Yeah, that's just so they remind that.
Okay.
Because I live my life on the reminders. All right. So let's see. We have already discussed a little bit about the time and place that we pray, so we're going to skip that question. How do you stay focused and avoid distractions? Like, even if you're in a quiet place, sometimes, our minds can wander. So what are some things that you guys do?
I do think the walking outside helps me with that because I get distracted in the house.
Right.
And sometimes it's not that I'm just praying out loud, but because I think our neighbors are probably like, that lady is great. But I do kind of almost, I mean, it's not really out loud, but I don't know. I'm kind of more intentional with, I don't know, when I'm walking out there, kind of talking to myself, but
Right.
not really loud talking to myself. You know what I mean?
I think because there are times where my mind is already set to the day. Like if it's a really busy day, I do find I struggle to keep myself focused. So I will try to think of maybe some verses to pray, and I'll pray using some verses because then that focuses my mind also on the word and verses that I have memorized or that I recall a phrase from. And then sometimes I just pray that God forgives me for being so scatterbrained. That my brain is already going so many different directions, and I will start over sometimes. I will not the whole thing, but I will start that thought over and come back and really try to focus. And I know I always feel bad when that happens, but then I think, you know what? He knows humanity. He knows that we do struggle with that. Just kind of like on Sundays, if my mind has already got a lot on my mind, and on Sunday I'm trying to focus through worship, they just mentally either closing my eyes, sometimes actually closing my eyes and just trying to hear what's being said. I do that sometimes actually say the words in the prayer out loud and not just thinking it in my mind. The out loud verbally helps me stay focused on that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
but
I say my prayers out loud too if I'm having any kind of problem with focus. And then I have a list typically that helps me. But yeah, those are the two main things as well that I do. So how has your view of prayer changed over time?
I think I just think it's natural. Of course, the longer you're a Christian or the older you get, I just think it's really amazing to look back and see maybe something that you prayed for that you thought you needed, that you didn't get, something you did, the way God answered prayers. You can look back and see how one place maybe prepared you for what was coming next that you didn't know. I just think over time, my faith has grown in seeing how God has taken care of us. And it's just amazing. Our oldest, we have 4 children, and our oldest got married last summer. And, as they're growing, you pray and pray and pray for the person that they might marry and what they would be like. And so it's amazing through the years. Sometimes I would think, oh, this person would be great, and then it's like, when I saw, how this matched up, and I've got a great son-in-law, but it's like, I just thought, just the answer of that prayer that had been her whole life, how I could see how they were really good for each other, how they really encouraged each other, and how they're going to work together in the kingdom. And just seeing those answered prayers, and also opportunities, like praying for opportunities and then seeing those opportunities come, when you're praying for them, just seeing over time that it's amazing.
I think something, as I was considering this question, I thought about, again, where I used to be in my prayer life and where I've grown. Confidence is what I think I lacked at the beginning was, I would pray for something and I would just, okay, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I felt like I really was, as I studied prayer more, I was that person of James 1 who was wavering because I wasn't confident, I guess. I wasn't as confident. And as I have become more confident and trusted more that even if it's not answered the way I want, he is still answering it. That I think is what changed my prayer life. My confidence every time I prayed, I felt a little bolder. I mean, I don't know that that's the word. I don't want to say that it was just, oh, I've got this. It was more hey, he really does care. My Father's hearing me. He
Kind of
wants what's best for
security.
me. Yes,
Almost. It's like you're
I felt
secure.
more safe to say, look, this may not be your will, but this is what I would like. But Father, your will. Just things like that. And so the studying of prayer, looking at Paul's prayers, I think is big for me. That's how I've seen my prayer change too, is by seeing how Paul prayed and what Paul prayed for, because he prayed a lot for so many things. And I think when we develop that confidence, you'll see your prayer life grow and you'll see the answered prayers better because you're reflecting on.
And knowing that God knows what's best. Like when Paul prayed for like the thorn in the flesh to be removed, and it wasn't, it says that, so that, and my grace will be sufficient for you. And I think to see sometimes it's not what we wanted, but just trusting that God knows what's best, and he can, just that trust gives us peace.
And
that he knows what's
that
best.
gives you peace, and it gives you realization that somebody else is working on this. It's not all up to you. And I think that builds your faith. I mean, in the long run, for sure. All right. So what's one quick piece of advice as we finish here that you would give someone who wants to build a consistent prayer life but doesn't know where to start?
I might say do a study of prayer. Like look up verses, Google like Bible verses on prayer, or look up and just study some. Spend a little time in studying what the Bible has to say about prayer and how important it is. Maybe if you grow in your realization of how important and how life-changing really it could be, that might be a motivator.
Learn a lot
for
from the
sure.
examples in the Bible, for sure, especially the people and the things that they pray for.
Do a study, on prayer maybe.
It reminds me, I heard a preacher talking about an instance in their local congregation where he asked somebody, had they been praying, and it was the prayer of somebody in the Old Testament. And I'm not going to say, I'm going to get the name wrong if I say it, so I'm not even going to say it. But the preacher said, have you been praying this prayer? Because I'm seeing those results in your life. And as a matter of fact, the gentleman had been praying that prayer. And I thought, wow, I think that for me was one of those moments that has always stuck with me on the power of prayer. So for, like you're talking about somebody who's trying to get started on prayer, praying these prayers of great men. I mean, we don't have every prayer ever recorded. So the prayers that must have been there must have been something to them that made them special to have those prayers recorded. Praying through different books, like the people who prayed in the Old Testament, or praying through Paul's prayers.
And I think sometimes people don't know what to pray for. And if you start studying what the Bible says, you'll see that, even Christ in the model prayer, it's spiritual. A lot of times, we focus on praying for physical things, where a lot of times, not that that's wrong, but there needs to be an emphasis really on the spiritual, praying spiritual things more. So I think sometimes as you study it, you learn more what to pray for, what we need to be praying.
Well, I had on here to pray the Psalms. I think the Psalms are they're very poetic in a sense. However, they all talk about different things. Like they're all focused on different things. And a lot of them are on worship. And so we just need, I think that's a good place to start. You read a psalm or even just a couple verses of that psalm, and you can probably make some kind of application to your prayer life. All right, so as we just kind of conclude here, I think there's just a few different questions that we need to ask ourselves. Do I pray consistently or only in crisis? And we talked about that a little bit. And if there's an old saying that if you only pray when you're in trouble, right? And so I think we need to be really careful that we are praying in all times of our life, not only when we're in crisis. Another question we should ask is, what does my prayer life say about my trust in God? And I think a lot of people don't put that trust and confidence in prayer like we should, as the Bible obviously teaches us to do. And then that in turn makes us not really trust that God is going to take care of these things or help us through these things or times of trouble and such. And so that's something we need to ask ourselves. Also, one last question is, what is keeping me from praying consistently, and what can I do to fix it? And so just kind of saying there's a problem and say, okay, what are the things that I can do that will help me get over this hump and into a more consistent prayer life? Like, if that means going and talking to a mentor, talking to someone older or wiser, or maybe an older Christian woman or something like that, there's different ways that you can do that. So as we finish today, we just want to say, if you have any questions regarding this podcast today, if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about after listening or viewing this podcast, you can email any questions at gbndaughtersofwisdom@gmail.com. And it's been so great to be with you today. Thank you so much.